Today, we are diving into a feeling that, let's be honest, a lot of us are starting to get. The feeling of outgrowing social media. And we're not just talking about being bored with it. No, this is a much deeper psychological shift. So let's get into the why behind this whole digital evolution.
Does this sound familiar? You open an app, you start scrolling, but that spark just isn't there anymore. What used to feel like a community, a connection, now just feels like this endless, overwhelming stream of noise. Well, that feeling? It's not just in your head. It's actually the very first sign of a huge psychological shift.
All right, first up, let's talk about that exact moment when the fun fades. It's that subtle shift from something that was genuinely exciting, a new way to connect with people, to something that feels more like a chore, right? An obligation, or just background noise in your life.
So at its core, this really just comes down to how our brains are wired. We are pattern recognition machines. And let's face it, on social media, the patterns become super obvious. You see the same kinds of posts, the same memes, even the physical act of scrolling is the same. Eventually, our brain just learns the trick. And that novelty, that thing that was so exciting at first, it just kind of fades away.
Okay, so this leads us to the real heart of it all, the invisible shifts that are happening inside your mind. This isn't just about being bored. This is your brain fundamentally recalibrating what it actually values. Let's break down how that whole cycle works.
First, you absolutely have to talk about dopamine. Social media platforms are designed masterfully to give us these quick, little satisfying rewards. Every single like, every comment, every new post you see triggers a tiny burst of this feel-good chemical. And that creates this incredibly powerful feedback loop. You get a reward, you feel good, so what do? You scroll more to get another one. It's exactly what keeps us hooked in the first place. And this is the crucial part, that loop isn't built to last. Just like with anything else, the brain starts to adapt. The pattern becomes so predictable that the dopamine hit just gets weaker and weaker. That same like doesn't give you the same rush it used to, so we naturally start to lose interest, a lot of the time without even realizing we're doing it.
This brings us to the next massive mental shift. This move away from external validation and towards internal self-worth. In the beginning, our sense of value can get really tied up in likes, views, and what other people think. But as we grow and mature, a lot of us start building a much more resilient kind of confidence, one that truly comes from within.
Is really that simple. Their confidence starts coming from within. And once that switch flips, the whole performance of social media can start to feel, pretty unnecessary. You just don't have that deep need to prove anything to an online audience anymore.
And then there's another huge factor, comparison fatigue. Social media is basically a highlight reel of everybody else's best moments, all curated to look perfect. And constantly seeing that stuff creates this cycle of comparison that, as psychology has shown time and time again, just inevitably lowers our own satisfaction with our lives. Eventually, we get tired of it, and stepping away from that constant comparison feels like a huge relief.
So how does all this internal stuff, these shifts in your brain, actually translate into real-world action? Well, once your brain chemistry and your sense of self-worth start to change, your external behaviors just naturally start to follow along.
Think about it. Our brains have to process every single opinion, every trend, every piece of information we scroll past. That is a huge amount of mental energy. It leads to this quiet, kind of background fatigue that just wears you down. As we start to value our mental clarity more, we instinctively start to filter out the biggest sources of all that noise.
This progression is really key. It often starts with just a simple feeling that hours of passively scrolling just feels like wasted time. And that little bit of awareness sparks a shift where we begin to actively prioritize real-life goals or skills or relationships. And ultimately, this can totally blossom into a genuine preference for living experiences instead of just consuming digital pictures of them.
And that brings us to privacy. Early on, the impulse might be to overshare everything to get attention. But with emotional maturity comes this new appreciation for privacy. Sharing becomes more selective, more intentional. And the idea of keeping some parts of your life just for yourself starts to feel not just comfortable, but really powerful.
So to wrap this all up, outgrowing social media isn't really about deleting your apps or making some grand announcement. It's about a quiet, internal evolution. It's a fundamental shift in your personal value system.
This table, right here, really puts the whole journey into perspective.
You can really see the overall theme, right? We're moving away from a value system that's all based on fleeting, external, public things, like dopamine hits and public attention, and we're moving towards values that are lasting, internal, and personal, like real experiences, mental clarity, and privacy. It's a fundamental shift from performing to simply being.
So our final takeaway is really a question for you to think about. Looking at this journey from one value system to another, where do you see yourself? And as you move forward, what does your mind truly value now? Thanks so much for joining us.